I've never been the kind of person who likes parties very much, but on that Halloween, my friends insisted that I go. It was a college party in a remote house, rented only for the event. That kind of big place with a dark garden and old balconies full of costumed people, drinking and laughing out loud. I didn't have time or money to buy a new costume, so I used one I found in a thrift store days before. A retro clown costume, half worn out, with a torn fabric mask and hand-sewn buttons. There was something strange about her, but it matched the Halloween weather. I arrived at the party around 10 at night. The music was loud and the place was already full. There were decorations everywhere, fake wets, red lights, and machine smoke coming out of the doors. At first, it was fun. I took some pictures, talked to some colleagues, danced a little. It was only after a while that I noticed something that made me uncomfortable. On the other side of the room, there was someone with the same costume as mine. The same fabric, the same faded colors, even the same tear on the shoulder. The first thing I thought was that it must be a coincidence, or maybe someone had bought a similar costume. But as the night went by, I began to realize that that person never mixed with the rest. I didn't dance. I didn't talk to anyone. She just stood still, always at a certain distance, turned in my direction. I tried to ignore it, but every time I looked around, he was there. At one point, I told a friend about it. She looked in the direction I pointed and said she didn't see anyone. When I turned again, the clown was gone. I laughed, trying to disguise the discomfort, but inside I felt that cold in my stomach, that kind of feeling that you try to rationalize and can't. I went out to the balcony to get some fresh air. The night was cold, and the light in the garden was dim. I kept looking at the lawn covered with dry leaves, trying to calm down. And then I saw him again. The same clown standing near the fence, motionless as if he were watching me. I froze. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me. I went back inside quickly and decided to leave. The host began to warn that the party was ending and people were already leaving in groups, taking rides. I waited for most of it to leave so I wouldn't have to cross paths with that guy outside. When I finally went, I looked at the garden, and the space where he was now empty. The way back home took about 20 minutes. I lived alone in a small apartment near the campus. Fear had already turned into discomfort, but I didn't think that he could have followed me. I locked the door, left the lights off, and went straight to the room, exhausted. While taking off the costume, I noticed something strange in the mirror. The mask I used had a small side tear. Now this tear was more open, as if someone had pulled the fabric. I stood still looking at that, trying to remember if it had happened at the party. The window of my room was open and a cold breeze passed by, lifting the curtain. By reflex, I looked outside. That's when the heart almost stopped. He was there, the same clown, standing on the balcony outside my window, motionless, the face covered by the same mask as mine, looking directly at me. I had no reaction for a few seconds, unable to scream or move. I ran to get the cell phone, but my hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped it. When I returned to the window, he was no longer there. Just the curtains swinging and the distant sound of the wind. I called the police, but the building where I live doesn't have cameras facing the back balcony, and no one saw anything. They made a quick round, found no signs of burglary. They said it was probably some Halloween prank. The next morning, I found something on the balcony, a piece of fabric identical to that of my costume, dirty with clay. Since then, I've never worn any costumes again. And to this day, when I hear the noise of cloth dragging on the floor, I feel the same chill that night. Story 2. The party took place on a Friday night at the end of October in a suburban house in Phoenix. It was a custom party organized by a colleague from work, the kind of event I would normally avoid. But everyone in the office seemed to go, so I didn't want to look like the antisocial stranger of the team. The weather was light, full of laughter, loud music, colorful drinks, and costumed people of everything. Vampires, zombies, movie characters. I was dressed as a cowboy, something simple, but that served the theme. As soon as I arrived, I realized that the house was full, but the atmosphere was pleasant. The host, an outgoing guy named Ben, made a point of greeting everyone and introducing each other. He was well organized, had put on bracelets to control the entrance, and commented that everyone there was acquaintances, colleagues, friends of friends, or neighbors. This information stayed in my head, but it would only become important well after. The low light, pop music from the 2000s, and the smell of beer mixed with cheap perfume. It was a man wearing an old doctor's costume, those from the last century, with a long coat and a leather mask covering half of his face. He just walked slowly through the rooms as if he were inspecting the place. At first I thought it was someone exaggerating the character, but as the night went by I realized that no one was talking to him. And when I asked one of my friends who the guy was, he frowned and replied, "Man, I have no idea. I thought you were Ben's friend." I went to ask Ben himself, who looked in the direction of that man and told me something that froze my stomach. I didn't invite anyone with this costume. From then on, the weather changed. People began to notice that the man did not interact with anyone. He just passed through the corridors, sometimes stopped in the middle of the room, looked around, and then followed in silence. The mask totally covered the face, and the look, or what you could see from it, seemed fixed, attentive. There was something wrong, but no one wanted to be the first to go there to get satisfaction. At a certain moment, a drunk girl approached him thinking it was some kind of performance. He tried to play, asking the name and touching the coat. He didn't answer. That movement was so strange and precise that it made the girl retreat and let out a nervous laugh. The guy then simply turned around and walked to the kitchen. Ben went after him. Me and 2 others followed by impulse. He had left. The balcony was empty and only the hot wind from Arizona passed through the curtains. We stayed there for a few minutes arguing if it was a friend of someone who decided to make fun. But no one recognized him, and no one had the visa to arrive. The party lost its rhythm after that. People started to leave early. Around midnight, there were only a few left talking in the garage. That's when one of the guests, a guy named Derek, came running from the parking lot, saying that his car had been broken into. We all went to see. The passenger door was open and the side glass cracked. Inside the car, there was a syringe thrown on the seat. The strangest thing was that it looked old, one of those thick glass with metal, and still had a drop of yellowish liquid inside. No one wanted to touch, of course. We called the police. While we were waiting, Ben remembered that the costumed man had left just through the door that led to the parking lot. The police arrived, collected the syringe and asked questions, but without much hope of finding something. None of the neighbors saw anything. After that night, everyone present commented on the so-called party doctor. Some people swore they had noticed that his car was nowhere. He simply appeared and disappeared without a trace. Ben reviewed the photos and videos of the party to see if he appeared in any, but the result was even more bizarre. In all the recordings where we remembered having seen him, there was only one empty space. To this day, no one knows who that man was. The police report on the syringe was never released, and the case ended up filed as vandalism. But sometimes, when I'm at an event and I see someone wearing a mask, the same chill goes up my back. Because that night, in the middle of that crowd, someone walked among us uninvited and seemed to know exactly what he was doing. Story 3. That Halloween night started in the most ordinary way possible. 4 friends, a rental car, and an 80s playlist playing loudly as we crossed the streets of Denver in search of a party. The theme was retro, and we were all dressed in character: leather jackets, shoulder pads, armed hair, and huge sunglasses. The party, according to the invitation we received, would take place in a decorated house in the northern region, easy to find. But the GPS took us to an address that, at first glance, looked exactly like what we expected. The house was big, old, with illuminated pumpkins on the steps and colorful lights in the backyard. Several people with different costumes walked around laughing low. The sound of music came from inside, muffled but constant. Nothing seemed out of place. We parked and went down excited, commenting on how much the host had worked on the decoration. It was a typical Halloween movie house. As soon as we entered, something already seemed slightly wrong. The song was an old instrumental melody, slow, that didn't match the party atmosphere. The smell of candle wax and old wood dominated the environment, but there were people dancing, or at least moving slowly, and others leaning against the walls, all masked or elaborately made up. We tried to interact. I said hi to a guy in a suit with fake blood on his face, but he just stared at me without answering. Even so, we keep trying to act naturally. We took glasses on a table which had some kind of red punch and began to circulate. Brooke, one of my friends, commented that it was a very different weather, and I laughed, saying that maybe it was the kind of conceptual party. But the more time passed, the more the silence of others began to bother. There was sound, but almost no one spoke. It was as if we were participating in something without understanding the rules. Suddenly, I realized something else. People seemed to move in a synchronized way, as if they followed a rhythm that didn't come from music. A group standing in the hallway turned their heads at the same time when we passed. The lighting was dim, and the smoke from the candles made the air heavy. One of my friends, Ryan, commented in a low voice that he thought we were in the wrong house. We tried to confirm this with someone, but no one answered, until a woman in a black dress approached slowly, holding an old glass cup, and whispered something I didn't quite understand. It sounded like another language. I felt an immediate chill. Brooke asked what she had said, and before I could answer, the woman had already turned around and disappeared through a side door. That's when we realized something really strange. The windows had thick curtains, all closed. The doors that led to the back were locked. I went to the main entrance trying to open it, and the doorknob just wouldn't move. I called someone trying to disguise the nervousness, but people just looked at us motionless. At that moment, a man with a dark cape and hood appeared at the top of the stairs. He went down slowly, and the noise of the footsteps echoed in the house. When he arrived at the last step, he was facing us, motionless, watching. My friend Sarah, trying to break the silence, laughed nervously and said, "This song is very weird, huh?" The man replied with a hoarse and calm voice, "She hasn't started yet." That's where the weather became pure terror. Ryan grabbed my arm and whispered to run. We ran to one of the side doors, pushing hard. She opened with a snap and a cold wind came in. We went out to the backyard, stumbling on the pumpkins and wet leaves. I looked back. People didn't follow us. They were just standing on the balcony watching. The lights in the house now flashed red, and that slow music had stopped completely. We got into the car in despair and accelerated without looking back. The road was empty, and the GPS showed that the correct address of the party was 3 blocks away. When we arrived, the difference was glaring. Laughter, loud music, dozens of normal people in costume. The real event. We told you what happened, but no one believed it. They said we should have entered some experimental art party. But when we came back the next day just to clear the doubt, the address of the other house was completely different. It was an abandoned residence without decoration, with boards on the windows and without electricity. No sign that something had happened there the night before. To this day, I don't know what we saw, but every time I pass through that region, I feel that same chill down my spine, and I remember that man's calm voice saying, "She hasn't started yet." Story 4. I've never been a big fan of big parties, but that Halloween in Ohio was different. My friend Julie had just moved into a huge house with a backyard and basement, and decided to have one of those parties that look like a movie. Flashing lights, loud sound, and dozens of people in costumes. I helped with the decoration and took several photos during the night, without thinking too much. It was one of those parties that go by too fast, between laughter, music, and drinking. When dawn came, the house was a mess. Glasses scattered, confetti stuck to the floor, and the smell of pumpkin mixed with alcohol. Just before we went to sleep, we sat on the couch to look at the photos. We were laughing at some ridiculous poses when something started to look strange. In several photos, taken by different people at different times, a man appeared in the background always the same way, standing still, wearing a white mask and a dark suit. At first, we thought it was a guest we didn't remember, but the more we looked, the weirder it got. No one remembered seeing someone like that at the party. The mask was not from any ordinary character. It was simple, white, expressionless. In one of the photos, he was leaning against the living room wall, in another on the side of the stairs, in a third on the balcony, looking in the direction of the camera, always motionless. Julie kept laughing, saying that it must have been someone from outside who came in just to play a trick. But the more I stared at those images, the more discomfort went up my body. The figure always seemed at the same angle, as if he had posed without being noticed. I asked who took the last photo, and no one knew how to tell. After everyone left, I was helping Julie pick up the trash. It was almost 3 in the morning when I took the bags to the backyard. The night was humid, and the wind shook the decorative lights that still flashed weakly. That's when I saw it. On the railing of the back staircase, there was something white. I approached slowly. It was the mask, the same as the photo, covered with dirt, with splashes of dry earth and a small crack in the corner. It seemed to have been left there on purpose, very visible. For a second, I was paralyzed. I looked around. The backyard was empty, the gate closed, and only the distant sound of the cars broke the silence. I ran inside, showing it to Julie, who turned pale. We tried to rationalize, maybe someone had forgotten, maybe it was a joke. But what really terrified me was the fact that the mask looked worn, old and dirty with fresh clay, as if it had been used outside, not inside the house. The next morning, with the daylight, we went to look again. The mask was no longer there. Only the dirt mark remained on the handrail, as if something had been supported there for a long time. We asked the neighbors if they saw anyone in the backyard at night, but no one noticed anything. In the following days, the weather became strange. Julie swore to hear footsteps in the hallway at night and once found the kitchen window open, even after locking it. One of our friends, who had taken several photos, sent a message saying that the images with the man in a mask disappeared from his cell phone gallery, as if they had never existed. To this day, I don't know who that man was, nor how that mask ended up there. The photos that are left are still on my phone, and sometimes I keep looking at them trying to find some explanation. But the scariest thing is that in one of them, you can see the reflection of a white face on the window glass, and no one inside the house remembers being there at that moment. Story 5. I remember that night perfectly because it was one of the strangest parties I've ever been to. It was a Halloween costume party, and a friend of a friend had rented an old house in the countryside of Vermont to do the event. The place was big, dark wood with creaking stairs and a musty smell mixed with cheap perfume. It was the kind of house you imagine in old stories, with photos framed on the walls and windows that beat with the wind. We arrived in the late afternoon and the atmosphere was animated. Everyone laughing, trying on the costumes, taking pictures. I was dressed as a policeman just to match the group, but most had worked out. Ghosts, witches, doctors, clowns, everything you can imagine. The host, a guy named Eric, was the kind of person who loved to exaggerate, so he decorated everything with candles, skulls, and even a smoke machine in the hallway. Later, when the people were already looser, someone commented that the house had a locked attic. Eric, of course, thought it would be fun to go there with some guests. We went up about 7 or 8 carrying flashlights and cell phones to light the way. The staircase that led to the attic was narrow and full of dust, and the air upstairs seemed colder than in the rest of the house. When we opened the door, we saw a small, dimly lit room with an old bed covered with yellowish sheets. The walls had cracks, and there was a table leaning against the corner. About her, several masks. Some were simple, made of cloth, others made of plastic, and one of them, a cracked white mask, half deformed, seemed to have been used recently. She was wet inside, as if someone had just taken her out. No one said anything for a few seconds. The atmosphere, which used to be of curiosity, became pure discomfort. One of the girls laughed nervously and said it must be old decoration, but no one really believed it. The mask didn't seem like part of the house. It looked personal, intimate. Someone suggested taking one of them as a souvenir, but Eric forbade it. "Better not to touch anything," he said, and everyone agreed in silence. We went back down to the party and the night followed. Drinks, loud music, flashing lights. Little by little, we forgot what we had seen up there, until around 2 in the morning, the sound was interrupted by a loud noise coming from upstairs. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, as if someone was walking from one side to the other in the attic. At the time, everyone shut up. Eric turned off the music and looked at the stairs. "It must be the wind," someone said, but no one believed it. The sound continued, rhythmic, firm. It wasn't the kind of noise the wind makes. It looked like someone walking deliberately. One of the guys took a flashlight and said he was going to go up, but Eric held him. "No, man, leave it alone. That's locked there." He took the keys and showed that they were still in his pocket. The problem is that the sound came exactly from there. After a few minutes, the noise stopped. We tried to resume the party, but the mood had died. People started to leave little by little, some making excuses, others just leaving without saying goodbye. I stayed to help clean up a little along with Eric and two more. When everything was quiet around 3:30, we heard a last sound coming from the ceiling. Something light, as if something had been dragged. We stood still, trying to understand, until Eric said, "Tomorrow I'll see this. Not today." The next morning he went up alone. I was waiting in the living room. When he came down, he looked pale. I just said that the masks were no longer there, not even the table. The room was completely empty, as if it had never been used. I never knew if he was telling the truth or if he wanted to scare us. But a few weeks later, the house appeared listed online. It was again available for rent. And in the photos of the ad, you could see the attic. But at the bottom of the image, dimly lit, there was something hanging on the wall. A white mask. Just like the one we saw that night. Story 6. The Halloween party at Ben's house, my coworker, was one of those that starts quietly and ends completely out of control. Everyone in the office showed up, each with a more ridiculous costume than the other, and the loud sound mixed with the smell of beer and cheap perfume made the place look like a crowded bar. I was dressed as a vampire just to participate in the game, and the night passed quickly between laughter, photos, and arguments about who had the best costume. When the lights started to go down and people were leaving, it was already past 2 in the morning. We were about 5 helping Ben clean up the mess. The floor was full of glitter, empty glasses, and pieces of fake wef. We were throwing everything in garbage bags, talking about how fun the party had been, when I noticed something strange on the kitchen counter. It was a latex mask, gray, wrinkled with dark eyes and deformed human features, almost too realistic. The kind of thing you would expect to see in an 80s horror movie. The material was still wet with sweat, as if someone had just taken it off. I asked whose it was, but no one recognized it. Ben looked and frowned. I've never seen this mask before. No one I invited used something like that. We even laughed, thinking it must have been from some penetra that appeared. But the more I looked at that, the more uncomfortable it got. The mask seemed alive in a strange way. It had a slight metallic smell, and the edges were dirty, as if they had been dragged on the floor. Ben took a garbage bag and threw it inside, saying he was going to take everything out before going to sleep. Shortly after, we left, but Ben was still finishing fixing the rest by himself. The next day, he texted me saying he couldn't sleep well. I asked the reason, and he said that when he went to take the trash out around 3 in the morning, he saw someone on the other side of the street. It was a standing figure, completely motionless, wearing the same mask he had thrown away. He said that the person was standing next to a tree, facing the house. He didn't talk, he didn't move, he just watched. Ben tried to light the cell phone flashlight, but the figure slowly retreated into the darkness. He thought it was someone joking, maybe a curious neighbor. But when it dawned and he went to check the trash, the bag where the mask was no longer there. None of the other bags had been moved, only that one. At work, he seemed shaken. He swore that someone had entered the backyard during the dawn. He found wet shoe footprints on the sidewalk. A week later, he still commented that he felt he was being watched at night. He even started to leave the curtains closed all the time. The strangest thing was when, days later, one of his neighbors asked if he was preparing another party. Ben said no, and the neighbor replied, "It's just that I saw someone wearing an ugly mask, one of those Halloweens, standing on the porch of your house last night." After that, Ben moved. I never saw that mask again, but I remember well the feeling of looking at it for the first time, and how it seemed that someone was still in there, breathing. Story 7. This story happened a few years ago, but to this day I think about it every time someone knocks on my door at night. It was Halloween, and we were at a party in a condominium in Dallas, one of those big parties with loud music, people dressed up in everything, and the smell of beer mixed with barbecue smoke. The owner of the apartment, a friend of ours named Travis, was traveling, so who organized everything was his brother Jake. He was allowed to use the place, and as the condominium was safe, no one worried much about anything. Around midnight, when the party was at its peak, someone knocked on the door. The sound was loud enough to stand out from the music. One of the most excited guys, already half drunk, opened it and ran into a pizza delivery man. He was wearing a simple zombie costume, one of those bought at the last minute, and a red cap pulled forward, hiding half of his face. He held a pizza box and asked, "Delivery to Travis." Everyone laughed because Travis was precisely the owner of the apartment, the guy who wasn't even there. We think someone should have ordered food and used his name by mistake. The delivery man didn't say anything else, he just extended the box. Jake took it, thanked him and offered a tip, but the guy refused. He just waved and walked away down the hall. The box was on the table for a while. No one opened it right away because everyone was busy dancing, drinking, taking pictures. After about 15 minutes, one of the girls commented that the smell of the pizza was not coming out of the box. That's when they decided to open. There was no pizza, just a note written with a black pen in half-shaky letters. "You left the door unlocked." Everyone laughed, thinking it was a joke, probably someone from the party trying to scare the others. But the more we thought, the stranger the thing seemed. No one remembered ordering pizza, and no one recognized the delivery man. Jake began to suspect that maybe someone had taken advantage of the confusion to enter the condominium. He went to check the door and realized that it was really unlocked. He said he remembered having locked it earlier. Then the weather began to weigh. The music was decreasing, the people stopped laughing, and the sound of laughter was replaced by that tense silence that comes when the plug falls that something is not right. We decided to look through the security cameras in the corridor. The building had internal monitoring. The doorman allowed it, after Jake insisted, and what we saw was what really made me lose sleep after that night. He was alone, carrying only that box. The video showed him walking to the end of the corridor and stopping right in front of the emergency door. It was enough to end the party. No one wanted to stay there anymore. A group slept in another apartment, and Jake only had the time to clean the basics before leaving. He said that when he went to take the trash, he noticed something that made him even more nervous. There was a second pizza box left outside the door, closed, unnamed, unmarked. This time no one opened. Days later, Travis returned from the trip and was furious to know what happened. He said that he never ordered pizza, never authorized any delivery, and that the condominium required visitor registration. But at that time, there was no registration. No delivery man entered through the main gate. The worst thing is that weeks later, Jake received a call from the concierge. A man had appeared asking for him, saying he needed to deliver something forgotten from the party. The description was almost identical: red cap, dark jacket, calm voice. When the security guard asked for identification, he turned and left. To this day, no one knows who that man was or how he got into the building that night, but every time I remember that, I think about the ticket. "You left the door unlocked." The way it was written, as if he had been inside even before knocking on the door, gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. Story 8. This story happened to a close friend, but I was there, so I can confirm every detail. It was Halloween, and he had organized a huge costume party at his parents' house in New Jersey. They were traveling that weekend, so he took the opportunity to call more people than he should. The house was old, made of wood, with a basement that everyone always found a little scary. The kind of place with a low ceiling, smell of humidity, and a constant noise of leak coming from some corner. The party started around 9 at night with the lights flashing, loud music, and people coming in and out all the time. The energy was good, even too much. A lot of drinking, a lot of mess. I remember I was in the kitchen getting a beer when, out of nowhere, the power went down. Everything was completely dark. You could only hear the confusion of people screaming, stumbling, trying to turn on the cell phone flashlights. It lasted a couple of minutes at most, but enough to make everyone nervous. When the lights came back, the people laughed, thinking it was just an overload. But that's when one of the guests, a guy dressed as a pirate, commented that he had seen a shadow coming down the basement stairs during the blackout. Everyone laughed, of course. It was Halloween, so no one took it seriously. The owner of the house, Ryan, said that this was impossible. The access to the basement was locked, and he himself had kept the key. But even so, some started joking, saying that he should go there to check. Ryan refused, half laughing, but you could see that he was uncomfortable. The rest of the night went on normally, but the story of the basement man became a joke among everyone. When the party was over, it was almost 4 in the morning. Me and 2 other friends were helping Ryan clean up the mess. The house was in chaos. Broken glasses, bottles, confetti, remains of fantasy on the floor. When we went to the back corridor to throw garbage away, Ryan stopped, looked at the basement stairs, and commented, "Do you know what's weirder? I don't remember locking this door after opening it earlier to get chairs." The doorknob was facing down, unlocked. He stared for a few seconds as if trying to remember something and ended up deciding to go down. He took a flashlight and asked me to go with him. I hesitated, but I went. The air down there was colder, with that strong smell of mold and wet earth. The light of the flashlight illuminated pieces of cracked wall, old boxes, and an old freezer turned off. And that's when we saw fresh mud marks on the floor, sharp footprints going from the center of the basement to a small, semi-open window. The glass was wet inside. "This wasn't like that here," Ryan murmured. And I knew he was right because we had been there before. That floor was always covered with dust. Now it seemed that someone had walked there recently, perhaps during the blackout. We stood standing, dying to understand when Ryan pointed the flashlight at a corner. There was a mask there, a wet rubber mask fallen next to the wall. It was one of those cockroaches sold in any costume store, but the interior was dirty with mud and seemed to have fingerprints on the edges, as if someone had torn it off in a hurry. He took a plastic bag and put the mask away, saying he would show it to the police if something disappeared from the house. But honestly, what scared me the most was what we saw when we went up again. The basement window was now completely closed. No one had stayed downstairs to close it. In the following days, Ryan became paranoid. He had all the locks changed, installed cameras, and even left external lights on all night. But a week later, he called me at dawn, terrified. He said he woke up to the sound of something falling in the basement. When he went to see through the cameras, there was no one, but the system showed the motion sensor activated inside the basement at 3:14 in the morning. He moved shortly after. The house was sold months later, and to this day, if you pass by, you can still see the small basement window, slightly stuck, covered by old mud marks.
I'm really grateful for staying until the last minute. It's always good to know that you're here, listening to every detail. If you liked it, comment which part was the scariest for you. And of course, sign up to keep listening to stories as dark as this one. See you in the next video.